I absolutely love these types of videos as it creates an opportunity for me to look back when I first got started with photography and review the things that I used to do that I originally thought was the right move at the time. But looking back now, I realized that these were habits, or that these habits were probably not as great of an idea as I first thought they were, and frankly was probably hurting my photography more than actually helping it. And I know we all have these types of habits that we used to do, but knowing what we now know, would never even think about doing these types of things again. So in this video, I'll review the 5 habits that I adopted when I was a beginner that I've now stopped that subsequently improved my photography the most. And the very first one is something that I call final compositions. And basically what this is I remember I used to get on location and I would scout around and I would find a composition I would like. And I would get everything all set up, get my tripod set to the correct height, and I would kind of mess around with the composition. But I became so fixated on getting it absolutely perfect in camera. And I got a really good example of this I'll show you in just a second. But I would spend an exorbitant amount of time trying to get everything absolutely perfect from a compositional perspective in camera. And this is the issue that I ran into. So this is a good example from the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina a few years ago. And I spent a ton of time trying to get everything absolutely perfect in camera from a compositional perspective. And what happens sometimes is when you do that, when you spend so much time trying to get everything perfect, when you get when you get your image back home and you start to look at it on your screen, you might start looking at it, or start thinking that you wish you would have done something a little bit different from a compositional perspective. And now I do something that's called shooting for the crop, because what I would do in the past is I'd get it perfect, and then I would get it back home on my computer and I'm looking at it, I'm going, it's not exactly how I did it. I wish I would have zoomed out a little bit further. So I now kind of get my composition perfect, and then I just zoom out a few millimeters. And what that does is it gives you additional latitude to crop and make any kind of additional compositional refinements, once you get home. And it's a huge, huge benefit. So for this instance, if I would have shot it just like this, I would have no room to crop this photograph except inward on all sides. But let me come up here to crop. By having it shot much, much larger like this, I can make those compositional refinements, because this area here is the area that I was originally not 100% sold on. And that's kind of why I was originally thinking, I was like, well, let me just kind of zoom in a little bit and position it something like this. But I ended up zooming out, basically shooting for the crop. Let me just hit reset here to keep it easy. And it's creating additional latitude all around the photograph here. Here's another example here. Let me close this down. This is from my recent trip to Bali. And if I would have photographed this, and this is kind of what I was thinking about when I had it in mind, or when I was framing up this photograph, there was a branch up here on the top that I wasn't 100% sold on. And I was like, well, maybe I'll just kind of, my composition will just kind of stop right at the top of this little hut and where this tree branch begins. But that was kind of the idea that I originally had, but I wasn't 100% sold on it while I was on location. So I went ahead and got everything perfected as close as I thought it would be, or I guess in my mind, what I was envisioning what it would look like. And then I just zoomed out a few millimeters to create that additional latitude. And ultimately what that allowed me to do is to, let me hit reset here. And this is that tree branch I wasn't 100% sold on. So I was thinking about kind of cutting it off right here. But just by zooming out a little bit gives you that additional leeway to make those kind of changes during your post-processing process. So shooting for the crop is a huge, huge benefit whenever you're on location. You just find your composition, get it all, as perfect as you think you're going to want it to be, and then just zoom out a little bit, give yourself a little bit of leeway. Now, the next habit that I no longer do anymore, and this is a huge one, and it's something that I call tunnel vision. So I used to get on location and I'd find my composition, and then once again I would just sit there and I would get so fixated on that composition. And what's so funny, and it took me years to figure this out, is just because I create what I think is a great composition, it doesn't mean that the conditions around my composition are going to be conducive for a great photograph. It also doesn't mean that the light is going to be conducive for a great photograph. Like, just because you create a composition somewhere, it doesn't mean that the conditions and the light are going to say, oh, look, Mark's got a good composition over there. Hey, light and condition, let's go over here to his composition to make him, or to enable him to create an amazing photograph. It just doesn't work that way. So I think not getting so fixated or not getting tunnel vision on your exact composition is huge. So this is an image from Moab from quite a few years ago. And I spent a lot of time. I love the reflection. I love this little pond here. And I got so fixated on this photograph. I took a ton of images like this. And then I remember I turned around and I saw this unfolding behind me. And this is just a quick iPhone photograph right here. But I was so fixated on this scene right here. And even though the conditions weren't super great, I never even turned around. I had such tunnel vision locked in on my composition. So what I would recommend, at least what I'm trying to do now, is when I get on location is I try and identify what the light is doing. Look for areas of interesting light. And if the light is over here, I'll try and create a composition utilizing this light. Or if the atmosphere is over here, I'll try and create a composition around that atmosphere. But just kind of surveying the scene and figuring out where the interesting atmosphere is, figuring out where the interesting light is, and creating a composition around that, as opposed to getting on location, finding a composition, and then just hoping that the light and the incredible conditions come to your composition, because a lot of times it just doesn't work out that way. Here's another really good example of this right here, where I was in Arizona. I love this composition, but the sky was just kind of was killing me. It just looked so boring. But once again, I was so fixated on this, and once I was done, capturing this photograph, I turned around to leave, and once again, I saw this right here behind me. Another quick phone shot right here. But that's just another great example of just not getting so locked into or not having tunnel vision on your composition. Just when you get on location, just kind of just survey the scene and just look around, see where that light is, see where that atmosphere is, and then build a composition around that as opposed to the other way around. But I could have definitely come up with something interesting here with these three cactus and a beautiful mountain in the background and this incredible sky behind it. Now, oh, and I forgot, this is one of my favorite examples of this. This is a photo from just a couple months ago, but this tree, I mean, it's a cool tree, but it's nothing absolutely insane. But as I was walking around this area, I saw this beautiful atmosphere. I saw this beautiful light, and I immediately was like, okay, I got to create something. I got to create a composition around this because this light's not going to last too long, and this atmosphere is not going to last too long either. But what a great opportunity to create something beautiful, even though this is not my original composition, but I just basically saw something exciting unfolding, and I wanted to create a composition around that. So I think that is something that is definitely helpful. Now, the third habit that I used to do all the time, and I don't know if this is so much a habit or just not knowing what I know now, but it's something that I call global everything. And it has to do with editing your photographs. So when I first started editing photos, I basically just did everything right here in this basic section. All of the heavy lifting, everything was done right through here. And generally, that is where the majority of your heavy lifting is done. But once I started to understand how local adjustments are using masks or only editing very specific areas of your photograph and treating certain areas of your photograph different than other areas of your photograph, absolutely completely improved the way that I edit my photos. So by using, and I just use this as an example here because look at all these different masks I highlight over these. Almost every area of this photograph is treated a little bit different. And when I toggle all of these on and off, you can see what a difference that has done. Here's another example of this. Once again, as I toggle over all these masks, you can see almost every area of this photograph is handled in a slightly different manner. And as I toggle this on and off, you can see what that has done right there. So by just not having that mindset of global everything and starting to think about how you can target certain areas of your photograph, because most of the time, areas of your photograph are all completely different and they shouldn't all be edited the exact same way either. So by using local adjustments in very specific areas, I think is a fantastic way to improve your photography. Now, this next one, this is a big one here. So let me just close this down. So it's something that I call photo hammering, and I was the worst with this because I'd get on location, I'd find that composition, and I would not move from that composition. And basically the entire time I'm there, so if I'm there for sunrise, like I was here at Mesa Arch, I found this composition, which is not unique at all. And I literally hammered this composition the entire time. And as I kind of just go through these photographs here, you can see that there's really just very slight differences in this, not a ton of variety here at all. But that's exactly what I would do. And I would just hammer this composition to death, making the smallest little changes to my composition, or just hoping that the conditions are going to change, or just hoping that the light was going to change. And I would just keep going. And I think I literally took maybe 200 or 300 photos of basically the same exact composition. And then I got home and you just pick the best one. And I mean, sometimes it works out okay, but a lot of times it just makes you a really unproductive photographer, because when you go to these incredible locations and you're there for sunrise or sunset, I like to come away with more than one photograph. I try and get a variety a little bit. And that's also where kind of paying attention to the atmosphere and the light comes in handy, because that light and atmosphere change constantly. So if you're going to follow those things around, your compositions are going to change as well. So I used to photo hammer constantly and just come away with just very, very little in the way of productive photographs. So it's something that I no longer do. I try and get as much of a variety as possible. Wide angle shots, using mid-range lenses, long lenses, just try to create a variety from a location to better tell that story, and ultimately enables you to have more photographs as well. Now this last one is something that I call tripod scouting. And this is a really big one, because I used to get on location and I would immediately have my camera on my tripod for some odd reason. And then I would look around for a composition. And when I would find a composition, I would plop my tripod down and I would start kind of maneuvering my camera around, loosening the ball head and just trying to zoom in or trying to create a composition. And then it wouldn't work. And then I would take my camera, my tripod, and I would walk around and I'd find something else, plop that tripod down again, and I would keep going through this process. And something really interesting happens when you have your camera on a tripod. It's not as, free flowing, at least from my perspective, is whenever I had my camera on my tripod, I would just be much more likely to get locked into that specific thing. The likelihood that I would move to go look at something else would greatly diminish when my camera was on my tripod. So I no longer tripod scout anymore. My favorite thing to do is to just get on location, pull my camera out of my bag and just keep it in my hand and just walk around with my camera to my eye and just looking around for compositions. I don't pull my tripod out until the very, very end. And that one helps me to get a better feeling of the area, because I'm just kind of more free flowing. I don't have a tripod holding me down. And it just helps me to look at more compositions, to experiment with different kinds of compositions, getting really low, getting really high, because we all know that getting your tripod really low to the ground is not the easiest thing in the world to do. It takes maybe a minute or so, and you're just less likely to experiment when you have a tripod on your camera. So I no longer do that, and I wouldn't recommend it. I would wait to the very last minute to put your tripod. I shouldn't say very last minute. I would wait till you really find something that you're excited about before you put a tripod on your camera. So just going handheld is a much better way to composition scout, as opposed to having a tripod attached to your camera. So those are 5 habits that I absolutely no longer do anymore. When I look back on those things now, none of those things were improving my photography at all. Actually, every single one of those things were hurting my photography. But at the time, I was like, yeah, these are good things. These are good habits to get into. I'm going to continue doing these things. So hopefully, if you are doing any of the things that I used to do, maybe this will give you an additional way to think about it, or it's something, a different approach, if you will. If you have any questions about any of the 5 habits that I used to do that I no longer do, please leave those in the comments section below, and I will do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as possible. And as always, if you did enjoy this week's video, if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you checking out this week's video, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.